Pastel is something that is not generally studied or appreciated on its own, despite the flexibility of the medium. Its ability to go from the same effects you have in oil painting to those of a regular drawing. And so between those two, there's this enormous range. It may be the most flexible and adaptable medium for drawing ever. My name is Robert Everin, and I'm a consulting curator at the Norton Museum of Art. The range of dates in the exhibition go from the 18th century right up just before the Second World War. We have Pastels from the early 20th century. Pastel was something that emerged in the late 16th century with experiments done by Northern Italian painters like Federico Barocci, who were trying to get something more into their drawings than the kind of colors available with the typical red, blue, black combination of chalks, which were also comparatively dry when compared with pastels. It took some time for them to do that. It took a while for it to catch on. Pastels didn't exist, so they had to learn how to make them. With pastel, if you can get the pigments, you can make things of almost any color. The chalk before had been such a formulaic kind of medium. There wasn't much mixing of colors. Pastel is a medium that the operative word is friable. It means it's crumbly and it can be crushed between the fingers, or in fact, if you've applied it to paper already, it can be crushed on the surface of the paper. The use of pastel grew during the 17th century, although the 17th century was still a bastion of the old chalk method. It was in the 18th century which was the first peak of use in pastel. It was most popular and important and most viewed. If we look at a painting behind me with one of the first in the exhibition by Natoire, you can see how it approximates to the effects of actual oil painting. And in fact, sometimes that kind of very realistic, very well executed pastel, people would call them pastel paintings because of their ability to do this. But that was the peak of the first, wave of pastel. There was a bit of a lull in the use of pastels in the early 19th century. Also, use of pastel, it's a drawing medium, and at least the really orthodox Impressionists didn't make preparatory studies for their paintings. Although we have a work here by Berthe Morisot, which is a study in pastel of probably her daughter. But it wasn't long before along came the Impressionists and post-Impressionists like Degas. We have a work here. It's a little unusual in terms of pastel because it looks more like charcoal. And normally you think of pastels as being used for bright, kind of iridescent colors. And this is used for something a little darker, a little more like charcoal. So then we have this second peak in the late 19th century among the post-Impressionists, where the ability to draw spontaneously but with such colors was really exploited, I think, almost to its maximum. We have one of the very best artists, one of the ones most skilled with it, Mary Cassatt. And as you can see, the painting in the middle, at a distance, you'd be hard-pressed to say if that was oil paint or if it was pastel. You wouldn't know which. She's also remarkable because she's kind of daring. She's this naked child gazing up with adoration. It's got this wonderful iridescent surface. And these are things that are wonderful to have in the collection. One of the works that is not to be missed is this very early Picasso at the cafe. I believe the artist was only 19 years old. It is, right from the get-go, an incredibly bold statement, particularly using pastels. He seems to have worked in broad, heavy strokes, so the delicacy of pastels is not so much an issue. Comes out of a post-impressionist style practiced by Degas and other artists. The subject is sort of cafes of Paris that Toulouse-Lautrec and others frequented. And these sharp profiles of the women and their fashionable hats, where these women we don't know if they're waiting for clients or what is going on quite. But this wonderful golden background also, which probably comes from his study of Degas. And it's done on board, and the quick strokes in the fabrics and the dresses, and the wonderful blending of them. It looks like something that was executed quickly and with an incredible sureness, which is one of the things we associate with Picasso. And this kind of caps the high point. It was one of the high points of the use of pastel in the 20th century. Down the wall here, there is a Man Ray. It's an unusual work. After, in the post-war period, pastel is one of those mediums that can be combined with other media really well. The Man Ray is very interesting because it's a combination of pastel and watercolor. So what you have is a kind of luminosity and almost a kind of light-creating surface in a very careful, quiet way. It makes for a very interesting drawing, and is one of that kind of effect is one of the reasons that artists find them sometimes working with both watercolor and pastel. They worked with watercolor and chalk too, but obviously pastel's a little richer. It's my hope the visitor would begin to think about the images in the show, not just because they're beautiful or interesting, which they are, but also how they've been shaped by the medium, how the artist has used the medium to produce these images. The pastels here don't come out very often for people to see, so having the chance to bring them out into public light is really worth doing, so we feel.